Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Karen Tucker, and I'm CEO at the Churchill Club. Our program this evening is called CIO Outlook 2016, Focus on Digital Transformation. And we're privileged to have with us 4 distinguished leaders: Sheila Jordan from Symantec, Ginna Raahauge from Informatica, Gerri Martin-Flickinger from Starbucks, and Lynn Vojvodich from Salesforce.com. Thank you very much for joining us, too. We know that you have busy schedules, and we appreciate that you chose to spend your evening with us. If you tweet during this discussion, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you will find other Twitter pointers in your programs. I'd like to especially thank Accenture for enabling this program and making it possible. In fact, I would like to introduce you to our program partner, Julie Rosendahl, who is a senior marketing executive in the Communications, Media, and Entertainment group here. We have worked with Julie numerous times over the last 8 years, and she is one of us. And so please welcome Julie to deliver the rest of the announcements tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good evening. Thanks again for coming. Welcome to the Accenture Technology Labs. Churchill Club continues to be the organization at the center of all the leading business issues and technology trends. Your contributions, I think, over the past 30 years have been world-renowned, in particular in economic growth and in innovation. And as with all Churchill Club programs, when we were talking to the speakers, we really wanted to dive into tonight what's new, what's different, and what really hasn't been talked about, so everyone can leave here and bring something back with them tomorrow when they go back to work tomorrow. The 4 leaders are going to really dive into our topic, which is digital transformation. And we're excited to hear their perspective on the road and what lies ahead. And so again, on behalf of Accenture and Churchill Club, thank you so much for coming out tonight, and please welcome to the stage Ginna, Gerri, Sheila, and Lynn.
All right, good evening. My name is Lynn Vojvodich. I'm CMO of Salesforce, and I think we've got a very exciting panel in front of us. And first I want to introduce our panelists. To my left is Sheila. Sheila is, she's been the CIO of Symantec now since 2014. Mm-hmm. She's led technology roles at both Cisco and Walt Disney. And she was recognized by Silicon Valley Business Journal as CIO of the Year. Mm-hmm. In the innovation and transformation category. Nice job, Sheila. Next, we have Gerri Martin-Flickinger, and Gerri recently joined Starbucks just a month ago, so she's made 3 trips from Seattle just, I think, in the last 8 days. Yeah. She serves as CTO and EVP at Starbucks, and prior to Starbucks, Gerri was CIO of Adobe, where she led and played a key role in the company's transformation to cloud services. And Gerri's also served as CIO for VeriSign and Network Associates. And she's an active member of the Wall Street Journal CIO Network and Sierra Ventures Advisory Board. Welcome, Gerri. And last, to my far left, is Ginna Raahauge. She joined Informatica as SVP and CIO just in July of this year. And she's been a senior IT executive at Cisco and Riverbed, so you've worked together with Sheila. And she's a founding member of South Valley Angels, which provides funding and mentoring to early stage companies. So before we get into the topic of CIOs and leading the digital transformation, I always like to ask one kind of icebreaker so you get to know our panelists a little bit better. And you all have such amazing careers, and looking at your LinkedIn profiles were just phenomenal. What's the one thing that's not on your LinkedIn profile that we should all know about here in this room? So Sheila, I'm going to start with you and put you on the hot seat here.
So because it's the holiday season, I think it's appropriate to share that I love to shop, but I don't just love to shop. I love to buy the perfect gift. And what that means is you got to know the person really, really well, and it doesn't have to be expensive, it can be whatever, but getting the perfect present for people, I live for that.
That's a good one.
That's good. I know Sheila really well.
Right. So just wait.
I'm waiting for our gift.
Well, so let's see. For me, I think it's Halloween is my favorite holiday. In my family, we do a huge Halloween party every year, like with 150 people, and we doll up the house and we all dress up. And this year, our costumes were so good that people didn't know who we were. So maybe that was...
Wait, what did you go as?
Well, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's daughter, and the Gravedigger. That was my family.
There you go.
Very cool. So shopping, Halloween, I think definitely traditions, events. For me, one thing you're not going to know on LinkedIn is I have a middle name that's Hawaiian and 19 letters long, and it is Keala Anuhea Okamaili.
I'm so glad that I didn't have to pronounce that as well. So.
Repeat after me.
Does that mean anything?
It does. It means soft, cool fragrance of the maili, which is the traditional lei that the Hawaiians get married under. And my adoptive father was Hawaiian, so.
Excellent.
Yeah, when he adopted me, that's what I got.
Okay, now we're going to get into the serious business.
Yes.
So I think this is probably the most exciting time I've ever seen in technology. And we have so many disruptive technologies happening today with social, mobile, cloud, data science, and now Internet of Things. And it's, I think, again, just the most exciting time. What do you see as the most disruptive technology happening, not only in your business, but in the industry? Sheila?
Let me start. So I actually think it is and I'm wimping out on the answer, but I actually think it's the convergence of everything you just explained. Because in the past, we all have our mobile strategies, we all have our IoT strategies, we all know what's going on in the cloud. And that's all great, and if you ask any IT professional, that's what we're working towards. But to me, what's so exciting in the opportunity as you think about digital transformation is the convergence of that. So when you think about the experiences we have to deliver from a customer, employee, or partner perspective, it's how all that comes together. So the end-to-end experience, and in the past, in how organizations are organized, it's marketing's doing this, or engineering's doing this, or sales is doing this. But the reality is that we have the ability now to see the data, traversing inside and outside the firewall, understanding it, and across the internal functions of a company that you can uniquely deliver different experiences. So it's really all of it together that I think is quite exciting.
Yeah, and I think I would really answer very much the same way, but maybe with a little bit different slant. I think the data is at the crux of so much that's happening right now, and it's the stitching together of that traditional corporate data, that transactional back office data, with the things that we think of as the marketing analytics data, and adding to that the in-product telemetry. That's the Internet of Things. That's the code you put inside software, the code you put inside the car, or the refrigerator with the sensor. And it's bringing those data elements together in a way that can drive real-time personalization and user experience in real time. I think that's the crux of the power of this transformation. And the expectation of that experience, as we know from how people use their phones and their expectations of apps, they want a very personalized one-on-one experience. And so I think that's what's really big right now.
Yeah, I would add convergence in a slightly different dimension. I think everything about the experience, you talk about how immersive it is and the crossover from personal to professional. So those personas are, a lot of people talk about blending. I think the blending is actually going away, and it's trying to understand the ambient experience of what that needs to look like. So personalizing isn't just about personalizing in the consumer anymore. It's personalizing every aspect of every persona that you might be playing, from a mom, a wife, a worker, an executive, so forth. So.
And I think that's the expectations of all of our consumers now, especially on the B2B side. Certainly from Starbucks, you've seen it from consumers, but on the B2B side, as end users, we're all consumers as well, and we have expectations, and our expectations as those consumers have completely changed, and we want to be wherever that customer touches our brand, know who they are, and take them on that journey. So it's a really interesting time. I want to talk a little bit about mobility, because we started there, and Sheila, you've talked about mobile moments of productivity, and I'd like you to touch a little bit on that, specifically of what you've done, bringing those mobile moments of productivity to Symantec, and how that's kind of shifted the philosophy at the company.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So I do a lot of my lessons learned by watching us as consumers and how we interact with our Starbucks app or Southwest Airlines app or something else. And what I find is that we are all multitasking, and we're all running and doing things. And I have two children, and they're both student athletes. So I'm often doing a lot of work or activities during their games. I'm actually watching them the whole time, undistracted. But the reality is I'm doing something during their games. And what I've learned is that it's really important. I mean, I'm amazed at how much you can get done as a mother and as a parent during those mobile moments of productivity, whether I'm checking them in at an airport or ordering their books for school or whatever that ends up being, those mobile moments. So I thought well, wow, why can't I do that, especially for our sales organization? I mean, the sales organization, as we know, in a B2B company, they're often on the road talking to their customers, from 7 to 10 p.m., and they have to go back home to their office and do all the administration stuff then. So I thought, well, why can't we offer them the same kind of mobile moments of productivity when they're on the road, between customer visits and between, when they're actually meeting with their clients. So in April, we gave, as our sales meeting, we gave our entire sales organization, which at the time was about 4,000 employees, the iPads, but also with what I would call these apps. And yes, it's Salesforce, and yes, it's the traditional applications. Yes, of course. Yes, it's Salesforce, and it's the Workday and Eloqua and the things that we use internally. But it's also about apps that they care about. Like, one of the things we learned was, I want to know what my deal is. I want to track my deal. So a deal tracker. I want to understand where it is and how can I find out where it's at, because I want to know, has it gone through the entire approval process and things like that. So it requires us understanding what's the angst the salespeople have in the field. What do they really want to know? Connecting them to LinkedIn and getting the profile of Ginna before they go and walk in and sell to Ginna. So automating some of that content about their clients. And it really does, I think, help when they're on the field and they're between clients and visiting the customer, that they can actually get educated and get some of their administration work done.
Yeah. And at Starbucks, I mean, I have the Starbucks app. Who else uses the Starbucks app? Many people in this room are over-caffeinated. I think I had enough caffeine to just kill a small animal this morning. But when we think about mobile experiences and the customer expectations, can you talk a little bit about where you see that going in the future with mobile and personalized experiences?
Let me talk about it a little bit generically. Yeah. First of all, I've been at Starbucks such a short time, it's hard for me to really talk specific to that app. But in general, and something that we did a lot even while I was at Adobe, was thinking about how to take your corporate back office, which for most shops and most businesses is still a big part of where your intelligence is about the transactions, the customer support calls. I mean, there's a lot of important stuff there. How do you take all that wealth and get it on a piece of glass in the hand of an employee or a partner or a customer in a way that's digestible for those moments? And I think an important aspect for IT departments and CIOs to really be thinking about is, how do they build that abstraction SOA layer between those two things? Because you really aren't building those experiences from the ground up. To do really interesting experiences, they have to be connected to some heavy lifting behind the scenes, whether that's, taking credit cards, or whether that's looking up your customer record, or whether it's, taking that quote and turning it into a contract. There's some heavy lifting happening. And so I think for mobile personalization to be successful, beyond the stitching of data I mentioned earlier, a re-architecting of how you think about back office transaction systems, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud, is vital. And most of the leading IT organizations that have really leaned into that are now getting incredible productivity gains, because they can change that user experience layer for those moments really rapidly without touching their back office. They just go through their SOA layer. And it is a pretty powerful thing, and I would just say that's, to me, one of the differences I'm seeing between those IT departments that have really started leveraging user experience on mobile and those that haven't.
You talked about the back office transactions, both kind of in the cloud and then on-prem, and you led a whole transformation at Adobe in terms of helping move the company to the cloud. Can you talk a little bit about that transition? I know a lot of companies are trying to move more towards the cloud, and some of the pain points and opportunities that you experienced around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was really interesting at Adobe and a lot of other places is a lot of that transformation is not about technology.
And you guys are all smiling. And
we're all smiling because we all get that. It's about culture. And it's about changing the mindset. And at Adobe, what was really interesting, it wasn't just about IT, it was also about the product engineers. For many, many years, they had built product in a traditional software release cycle, where a software release could be a year or 18 months. And, it was a very waterfall-like process. And that was how they built the product. And when you start really becoming cloud-centric and think about becoming SaaS-enabled, you start running in truly a more agile DevOps model. That's just the natural place to get to. And if you try to just keep doing waterfall and now do it in the cloud, you're not going to get the value. And so I think higher priority than any piece of technology change you're making to take that journey, you've got to think carefully about culture. And you have to think how it's going to change the way your teams work. You have to think about the way you test. You have to think about the way you iterate. You have to rethink release. The concept of release in the cloud is completely different than release in the traditional way.
And I just would add just the consumption. Your customers are consuming those services differently.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where services, in my opinion, from an enterprise perspective, is the same as apps as a consumer. It's we're delivering those services and how one chooses to consume them in all the different ways. I think that adds to how it has to be so connected.
Yeah, and if I can just riff off of that a little bit, I mean, it used to be you bought a box that had a product in it, and that was a SKU.
Yeah.
Well, now you buy a set of services that are completely, infinitely reconfigurable.
Right.
Wow, can't do that the same old way in the back office.
Kind of impacts the billing process a bit.
Kind of everything, yeah.
And Ginna, you're moving to a subscription-based model at Informatica. What advice would you give to CIOs here as you're thinking through kind of that subscription, cloud-based software as a service model?
Yeah, I think when you think about the DevOps transformation that's going on, you really have to embrace and pick some very fundamental, foundational, strategic partners and vendors. And you have to do that very carefully because they're going to be your success metric. They're actually going to help you scale. What we're doing we're not actually going and building all of the data center capability and hosting. We're picking very strategic partners that are going to help us not only deliver the service, but resell the service and maybe even white label or OEM that service. So I think that transformation of the culture, I think your channel changes and your disty changes and it becomes something very multidimensional. And how you establish those partnerships is really key. I think the other thing, you talked about journey. The one thing that is really, for me, is the journey is long and sometimes dark, into the darkness of unknown. So you have to be very comfortable with that ambiguity, the fluidity, right? I hear a lot of that interchangeable. To me, that's something that's very fluid, and how you are actually going to make it more dynamic. Forecasting is probably the thing that keeps me up at night on that.
I'm curious
front.
how you guys have led through those dark times, because as an end user from the CIO perspective, I've experienced some of those dark times, wanting my project to get off the ground. And what's some of the advice that you would give to the CIOs and other technologists in this room as you're thinking about this a huge digital transformation, something that's really exciting, really complex, but you're going to be experiencing those dark times. What's some of the advice that you have around that?
For me, it's really about trying to connect those patterns and solutions and understand that you're not going to have the full roadmap. And you have to establish, look, I understand your metrics. I understand what your pain is that you're trying to solve, and I'm your partner in making sure we get there. And some of the stuff, the darkness is some of the stuff you have to figure out along the way. But if you leave it flexible enough, then you can actually ebb and flow based on the situation as it's presented, whether it's situational or environmental, doesn't matter how it comes in, but you really do have to have that mindset of partnership, connector. Let me connect the solutions in a different way for you.
Yeah, I'd probably add to that the word relationship.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've noticed about dark times, and I've been in this industry a long time, there have been lots of dark times. There's two things that have always helped me lead through that and get through that. And one is having relationships with the people I'm in it with, whether that's my own team or whether that's my business partner that I'm trying to help be more successful. And it's not just about like knowing them and they give you slack because you've done good things. It's about being really transparent. And it's a lesson I learn every year over and over again in every single engagement I have. And every time I hit the dark time, if I'm completely transparent with all of my partners around the table, not only in what's working, what isn't working, and what we're all going to have to solve together, it just gets you through it. Yeah. And it sounds so simple. I mean, it really is back to a people-to-people relationship.
Yeah, I'm curious, Sheila, because you had a different experience than both Gerri and Ginna in that you were brought on to Symantec to insource a lot of the IT. Can you talk through that?
Yeah, so I would say from a leadership standpoint, so in February, I'll be with Symantec for 2 years, and I was hired to insource IT, which isn't often that IT gets outsourced in a high-tech company. So, and a board of directors had made that decision 7 or 8 years ago, and I'm not opposed to outsourcing. What happened, though, is because of the there was a lot of change in leadership and just a lot of change that it wasn't effectively managed, I would say. So when we came in, we had legacy technology, legacy processes, legacy, multiple ERP systems. I mean, it was pretty outdated. And so when you lead through that process, and then, oh, by the way, as we're starting to insource, I was a third of the way through the planning, two-thirds of the way through the, no, a third of the way, two-thirds of the way through the planning, a third of the way through the execution, when all of a sudden the company then made a decision to do this thing called, a small thing called operational separation. Let's split the company into two, while in the middle of insourcing. So, you know, at those moments, and I do think there are these panic moments that you sit there and say, how can I separate the company when I'm not even sure of the environment, because the environment was held by a third party and it wasn't really well documented. So how can I separate the company? And oh, by the way, this had to be done in 1 year's time. October 3rd was operational separation date between Symantec and Veritas. So I would say a couple things helped me lead the team through that effort. One is, I think it's really important that the leader and the leadership team and the business partners, who's ever leading the effort, sets the guidelines and the strategies of these things are non-negotiable. When I went through the separation, I said, we're going to do a private cloud internally. We're going to insource our data center and do private cloud, and that's going to be kind of the infrastructure decision. And then we're going to move cloud everywhere else we can on all the applications, and so cloud, cloud, cloud. So when you make decisions like that up front and you don't allow to them to be revisited, those are the guiding principles, then everyone can kind of march behind that and make that happen. The other thing I would say is you got to literally get, and I would say this applies to the digital transformation today, we have got to get rid of the word perfection in our vocabulary in the IT organization. There is no such thing as perfection anymore. You know, I would tell my CEO all the time during the operational separation, something's going to break. Something is going to break on October 3rd. Something's not going to work. Now, I promise you it won't be the ability to book revenue, but something else will break. And I just think it's important to kind of set that expectations with the speed and pace and consumer expectations. And Apple, I think, has taught us all. In fact, Apple's taught my mother, my 78-year-old mother, that she can upgrade her operating system on her phone by pushing that red little button, right? So, I mean, the reality is that that's what's in the consumer hands. Yeah. And so we have to make sure it's not perfect, that next upgrade, but the next iteration and the next iteration. Yeah. So setting those guiding principles, accepting something less than perfection and knowing you're going to iterate over time. And the final thing I would say is that when you're leading something massively transformational and you're in like all these roads and all the tracks are converging and things aren't looking so good and you're having those couple bad days, you have to celebrate red. You have to celebrate that it's a problem right now. We've run into a hiccup, and you can't be afraid or leaders create an environment that red is bad. You know, when the first time I reported that we had an issue on our separation, red, it was assumed like, oh my gosh, we're red, this, you know, the sky's kind of falling. The reality is you want me to report that I've got a problem right now. You want me to have that. You want me to be transparent.
Transparency.
And ask for help. You know, the final point is that it's perfectly okay to say, we're struggling on this one. You know, the real estate site consolidation hasn't happened the way we wanted to, or we got circuits to do in some third world country. It's okay to say I'm having a challenge with this and I need some help here. So I think those things that, you know, years ago you had to know all the answers and have all the answers, you know, you just can't. The pace of which this all is moving, and many of that applies to kind of digital transformation as well.
Yeah. I want to get back to a point that I think, Gerri, you brought up initially, which was about the data. And we are experiencing just exploding volumes of data. More data has been created in the last year. 90% of the world's data has been created in the last year, yet as an industry, we're only using 1% of that. As you think about all this data that's being created, I mean, what are you thinking about as a CIO, and how do you secure that data? How do you get that data into the right hands of the right users, but again, at the same time, make sure that it's secure and keeping a tight arm on that?
I can help you with security.
Yeah. You know, let me just make a kind of a generic comment about data and security that I think we'd all agree with. Probably the single most important thing for IT professionals to do today as they're helping think about security in their company with data is to make sure they get clarity around data classification. And understand within their business what is the parts of the data that really, really matter versus those that don't, because all the data is not equal. Right. So I think that would be just my one general comment about data and security for all IT professionals and all companies to think about. Data classification, you want to nail that. and it needs to be something you nail with your business partners, and it needs to be very transparent. And from that, then you can start to build your real strategies on top of that.
I'd actually like to comment on the classification. I think there's something starting to emerge, and as structured, unstructured data comes together, as we see a lot of the digital revolution, right? We see how data is traversing across different mediums, right? Coming in through sensor. I think there's this term that Gartner started coining around IoT becoming information of everything. And I think this is going to really start to challenge how do you classify data that is maybe starts out organically as something, but once you merge it in or you start looking at what the outcome of that data is, it becomes 2 or 3 different classifications. Right. And I don't know who solved that yet. I don't know. I think maybe there's probably some really smart people in the room that maybe have a startup that we don't know about yet. And I do think that's going to be a big challenge because it's going to change the way that you actually do your meta tagging, how you actually search these massive volumes of data. So the classification is key, but what's the next level of that?
Yeah.
It's fair.
And I just want to add on this because I have to, but I'm just chomping at the bit. But I think in the past, security professionals and CIOs or CISOs were responsible for, the bodyguard at the door, identify and protect.
Yeah.
Keep the bad data out, keep the bad guys out. And I think that's long gone. I mean, when we think about cloud and inside on-prem, cloud, IoT, mobile, and all that. Advanced protection is important, but it's not enough. You can't keep keeping the bad guys out is not enough. So then you think about information protection. I want to protect and put layers of security around that data that's so critical, because I totally agree not all data is equal, and you have to identify the data in your organization that is so critical that you want to have triple layers of protection against it. But I also think the mode that we have to react to, in addition to the change in digital transformation, in addition to our consumers coming into the organization as employees, in addition to the way that people move and do all the things that we're doing, we have to think about security in a very different way, that it's not only about identify and protect, but it's about how we detect, recover, resolve before you even know you had an issue. And that's where I think there's a lot of changes happening around advanced analytics. We got to get more predictive about it versus reactive. And that's where, Symantec's working on a lot of that. But in general, I think as CISOs and all that, it's not about getting the data. It's about how do you analyze it? How do you be smart about it? Advanced analytics, behavioral analysis, machine learning. How do you get smart about it so that you can react quickly? Right. But I guess what I would like to do is, can I turn that on you?
Sure.
I mean, as a CMO, how do you think about the data and working with CIOs? Do you think we're still all slow and not reacting to the CMO?
Ooh, I like it. Here we go.
All right, bring it.
There we go.
I wanted to comment on something that Gerri said earlier about relationships, because with my CEO, with Ross Meyer-Cord, we have a great relationship. And it's one of those relationships, it's totally built on trust, where we can just pick up the phone, and because things are going to go wrong. Right. And actually, you want things to go wrong, because that's something I always tell my team is, if we're not failing, we're not pushing the boundaries of how we can innovate, how fast we can go. So I want to fail. I want to fail fast. I want to learn my failures, and then where we're innovating and really succeeding, I want to go as fast as we can and experiment and try new things. And if you're not failing, you're not experimenting, and you're not pushing the boundaries of where you can go. And so the relationship with Ross is really one built on trust and having that ability to say, we're failing here, we're missing here. I really liked your comment about celebrating the red, because usually when you see that red on your dashboard and they're going through all the projects and it's the marketing project that's red, it's like, but it's like, okay, how do we get through this? This is a very complex project, and we really need to work through it. But it's interesting, in talking with CMOs and CIOs, I think it really ranges the relationships based in the company that you're at. Some CMOs I've talked to, they've actually brought their technology in-house, the rise of the chief digital officer and really bringing a lot of their technology in-house. And so they don't work a lot with the CIO to help them drive their business, whereas in other companies, it's a very, very tight relationship. And I would say we're somewhere kind of in the middle. I've got technologists on my team, but I look to Ross to really help drive that relationship, and we partner well.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I like your celebrating red. That's good. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We talked about cloud, social, mobile, data. Now let's just talk about innovation in general and really the role that the CIO can play in helping companies harness all these digital transformations to innovate. You know, we talked about innovation, and Sheila, what are you doing at Symantec and helping other CIOs here to think through how you can really help the company innovate?
Yeah, so I think it spans, because I go back to the point that we have to enable the entire company. So whether that's the product teams on engineering, marketing, finance, the sales team, so it is, across each function. But I would say that one of the biggest things that I don't think we talk about a lot on innovation, we certainly talk about the product development, solutions, services, what we're doing as a company, and that's all really important because we are also thinking about a whole different slew of business models that will be delivering security as a service as well. But I actually think IT has a unique position and a unique view. We are one of the few organizations inside an organization, besides finance perhaps, that gets to see the end-to-end.
Right.
We get to see it all. We get to see where the gaps are. We get to see where the redundancies are. We get to see that there's 6 customer portals, and why do we have 6? We get to see all that. So I would say that a big part of innovation, this is going to sound silly, for IT, is to help the organization simplify. Because what happens over time is you get so complicated. You create lots and lots of complexities because you can. If we're trying to do digital transformation where it's a frictionless experience, it just happens and it's magical and I'm personalized and relevant and I found the perfect present for you and it all happens in an automated standpoint, then that's amazing. It's that frictionless. But to do that is a lot of work. To take complexity out of this legacy systems in the environment is hard. And I think in a lot of ways that's how IT can contribute to innovation.
Yeah, I think one thing I've seen through the years is so many IT departments are still project-driven and operations-driven. Like they got 2 silos and they're historically still running as projects with budgets and operations to keep the lights on. And I think where I've seen innovation and IT really get to the table and help a business move to the next level of how to use technology and innovation, those barriers have to start breaking down. And the IT folks have to actually come to the table with ideas and not just, okay, I need another $1 million to get my project done, or, oh, I'm sorry about that outage last week, business, it's because of X, Y, and Z. They need to come to the table and say, hey, you know what? I saw this cool thing that my kid was showing me that they had on their iPad, and I was thinking about what I saw in the business last week, and what if we, and they draw something on the board. I think that's the way every IT professional should see themselves in the future, as the ideation person that can help bring innovation to the business. But in order to do that, you have to first of all be looking over your kid's shoulder at their iPad and seeing what they're doing. You have to stop thinking about just getting the next project done on time, on schedule, and asking for more money when you need it. You have to give yourself some brain cycles to think outside the box. I think that's really important. Hard to do. It's very hard to do, but I think that's where I'm seeing the really hot innovation ideas coming from, is people who have time to think about it. And we haven't allowed much of the industry's IT professionals enough time to think.
Ginna?
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with you have to take the time. You have to protect and preserve that time. I think there was a book written by Patty Arizalo here called Rise, and that was, she was the GM, the 33 years old GM of HP, and she talked about that, and where she had her magnificent failures is when she booked herself and made herself too busy. And it really is about, you have to be less busy in order to see the peripheral, right? And I think it is about being open. It's about taking more risk, getting outside of your comfort level, leading by example with your team. That's a lot of innovation if they see you taking that level of risk. The other thing is you have to push them to continue to grow and learn. And it isn't just the next certification and the next technology. It is really about what is that convergence, if we kind of follow that thread of convergence that's happening. Your example of, hey, this is what's going on my kid's iPad or this game. How do we actually, that's how gamification started, right? It's how do we take gamification and actually apply it to enterprise and industry and learning in new ways, right? So
now you all have worked for technology companies, and so I think being a CIO at a technology company may be different than being a CIO at a non-tech company. Can you address or give advice to CIOs that are working at companies where they're not seeing that level of innovation, and how they can help kind of spur that innovation within their company and within their teams?
I would start. I think a good idea is just coming together, cross vertical industry, right? Sharing, because there's a lot of use cases that have the same problem, challenge, footprint. We may solve them creatively differently. And maybe because we're high tech, we're closer to some of the leading edge, bleeding edge. I think it's also maybe some of the non-high tech companies out there is assess what level of risk are you taking in thinking and being bold and going and defining things that are only really 50% known? Or is that something you can teach us to do more? Because we are very conditioned in high tech for kind of that rigor, perfection, zero tolerance of the customer outage. But
I have a couple of maybe thoughts to add to that. Agree with all of that. I think in other industries, and I think this may be true in high tech too, it's always good to keep some young workforce coming in. I think if you just have some young technologists coming through your organization, you will find fresh ideas if you're listening. So I think making sure that in the industries that you're not stagnating your IT staff. I think the other thing about the question you just asked doesn't feel as relevant to me today as it did, say, 5 or 6 years ago, because I do think the consumerization of IT has massively changed the conversation in every industry, in every corner of the world. I mean, it would be pretty hard. You said, how does they bring innovation into a company that hasn't been thinking about it? I'm hard pressed to think of an industry where somebody sitting at that top table isn't coming in with their iPhone or their tablet saying, how could we use this in our company? Probably more likely is maybe the undirected innovation going all over the place is a bigger worry. So I think consumerization has frankly made that less of a problem today, but I would still encourage the younger workforce is a really amazing place to get that digital native perspective, which really is going to be the next wave.
Yeah, a couple comments. So one is, I mean, I've had a unique privilege for the first time in my career in the last year and a half to work directly for the CEO. And I think this is not a high-tech thing. I think this is most CEOs. And Mike Brown's five goals that he could repeat to you if he met you is simple. It's growth, 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 and growth. And I think that's true of kind of every CEO's mentality. The reality is that when you're in IT, and this is why I love the digital transformation, because I think it's going to change the conversation more than anything else has ever changed, is that IT has traditionally been back of the house, cost, 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 cost. And how do we reduce the cost? How do we get more value out of it? What have you done for me lately? What's the total cost of ownership? Cost focused. And I think with digital transformation and all that we can deliver in any industry, there isn't a single strategy in a company, I think, today. In fact, I just met recently with a CEO of an airline, and he said, I'm not an airline. I am a technology company with wings. And when you think about it, it's RFID, it's packaging, it's luggage, it's all the way to booking and all the way through, because I am a technology company with wings. And you apply that to any industry and any vertical. So I don't think there's any strategy in any company anymore that can be done without technology. In our business,
Mark Andreesen's Software Eats the World. And that's, to your point, that was 2010 when he wrote that Wall Street Journal article.
And I think we're business leaders inside our company. Our business happens to be about technology.
So can you touch on that? Oh, go ahead.
I have actually one thing on the software eats the world, right? And I think this is going to be interesting to watch over time. Data is really at the heart of everything and the intelligence and what we're looking for, right? There will come a time where you won't need an application or software to get to what you want. And, it's some of the questions sitting on some of the Oracle councils, asking Oracle and really challenging them to think about at what point is ERP going to no longer be needed? Because we don't need to process the transaction. You just actually need to organically mash it up and look at it, right? And make your decision more intuitively and sensing, looking at that transparency. And I think that's something to watch for, is at what point applications today are the way and the mechanism, the way we consume things, but when is that going to change?
Sheila, you hit on a really good point in terms of sitting with your CEO and you report to the CEO. And as you think about the role of the CIO, especially with digital transformation and bringing business and technology together, what are some of the changes that you're going to see in the role of the CIO and also the people that are coming into that role?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to some of the things we said before is, it used to be CIO, we may have been order takers, we may have been, the business decides the strategy, and then we'll say, we'll answer and tell you how much it's going to cost and tell you the timeline. And I just think all that's changed. Back to what you had said earlier with your CIO and your relationship, it's a partnership. And what can we do, and what can we do, and what can we do it? And again, I think about agile and sprints and iterations and phases, and it's not this long gone is the day that it's a 3-year monolithic large transactional system. I mean, 3 years we're all dead, right? I mean, everything's maybe not, but everything's
You're fired.
Right.
Just at our Halloween party.
Just at the Halloween party. Right. But it's what you can deliver in the next 90 days, and how do you do that together, and iterative and agile, and what are you learning, and the market conditions change. So I just think of it as a complete partnership with the business, and how can you contribute to, and I even cringe when I hear the words, we enable the business. I just don't even think we're an enabler. That even sounds weak. We really are
driving the business.
Driving with the business on how we can create growth.
Yeah, I liked what you said, Sheila, about we're business people whose domain is technology. And, I have the CTO title now after being a CIO for 15 years in 3 tech companies. And really, as a CTO for Starbucks, I'm a partner with the other executives to help really define a technology agenda for the company. Maybe we'll see title changes, maybe we won't around the industry, but I do think the mindset that it's about technology leadership from a business lens is critical. And I think that's why we hear all the debate about titles and et cetera, et cetera. I think it's just about the lens and getting it to be a business partner at the table.
I think, it's interesting, the transformation that's going on, and it is this disruption in titles, and there's a lot of provocative discussion around CDO and what does that really mean, and the digital transformation driving, is it driven from marketing, is it driven from IT, and this tug of war, and I think we just need to shed that, right? It's not the us and them anymore. It's what are we really trying to transform and solve and move towards, and what is the evolution? What's the revolution? There is a data and social revolution happening around us, and some of it is organic and some of it is very planful, and I think that's where we have a unique perspective of understanding how to manage scale, right? And we've been very well versed in making those strategic decisions at the foundational layers to make sure that we're carefully considering that along the way. And there's a lot of value in that, because the business needs to be focused on where they need to head, how they want to get to the market, where do you want to take that market share. The competitive landscape is changing all the time, right? You look at these magic quadrants, and more and more of them are transforming, and you see bubbles come in, and then you see new quadrants because they've offshot into something else, into a new dimension or a new definition. So I think there's a lot of this fluidity, again, kind of coming together.
So you would never know it by looking at this panel today, but less than 20% of CIOs at Fortune 500 companies are women. In fact, only 17% of Fortune 500 CIOs are women. And Sheila, I know you've done a lot of work around diversity and women in tech. Can you talk a little bit about the efforts that you're doing? And
yeah, I actually kind of get just depressed when I hear the statistics, because I do think it's a real problem. And I think that it's not just about just gender diversity, it's just diverse thinking that you can bring into an organization. And what our work has done, so we have this program called SWAN, which is our Symantec Women's Action Network, which we lead inside the organization to create the environment where women can grow and flourish and develop. But actually, in most of the statistics you guys know, I think we have 2 12-year-olds in the audience, but the decisions are being made to not get into STEM and science and math is at the 12 and 13 and 14-year-old age. And that, to me, is, I think, the biggest opportunity we have. Is you talk about pipeline, and we had a huge internship program at Cisco, which was fantastic. I've tried to create and emulate some of that at Symantec, and it's fantastic to bring in, interns and women and men into the internship program. But the decision sometimes to not get into science and technology and math happens when they're in junior high. And so I think the effort of STEM, and I think a lot of those efforts we've got to build pipeline. We've got to show that science and technology and math are cool. We've got to continue doing that as role models. We've got to continue messaging it. We've got to be out there in the universities, because that's where we're kind of losing ground.
Ginna and Gerri, how do you, Ginna, you want to talk a little bit about it?
I have one son. He's 12 years old. He loves coming to work with me. And I worry about, I am very concerned about the STEM, and we do need to grow STEM skills here. And I do worry about sometimes over-rotating on the women, but I am equally concerned about we do need equal opportunity. We do need equal pay, equal rights, equal mind share. But I do think it's our job to bring the next generation along. And that's as simple as it needs to be, whether it's for my son, it's for Gerri's twin daughters, or Sheila's son and daughter as well. It's really our job to do this. There's not anybody else's responsibility but ours.
Yeah.
Agree with all of that. I think it's the whole youth generation in STEM. And, we're losing youth mindshare right now. I had the pleasure of participating in Girls That Code this last year while I was at
Awesome
Adobe.
organization.
And if any of you in this room want to get involved in something, I highly recommend that organization. I just was involved for a few days with one of the groups of girls in the Silicon Valley that Adobe was sponsoring. And what a marvelous group of young ladies. And to watch them grow during a 6-week program that's kind of like a summer camp model, it was spectacular. And I was so uplifted at the end of that experience when I saw this room of about, maybe 30 young girls.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know if they'll be technologists, but they got a really great exposure to what's possible. They got to learn some things they wouldn't have learned otherwise. And so I think the more we can all support in our communities or in our companies, those kind of programs for whatever youth, whether it's boys or girls, I just think we need to keep everybody really interested in what's possible, because it'll be terrible if we get to the other end of this journey when we're all retired and there's no technologists to run all this great stuff we're building.
Or it's outside of this country, right?
Exactly.
I mean, we do need to covet our own IP.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to switch gears. We're getting to the last part of our section, and I always like to end with some rapid fire questions. And so I'm going to ask some rapid fire questions where you can.
Pressure's on.
You can give the pressure's on.
Here we go.
Okay, you guys can give me one word
Start
answer.
with Ginna.
Okay, Ginna, we're going to start with you.
I know. We're ready.
Okay, this is one after my own heart. Do you agree with Gartner's prediction that CMOs will spend more on IT than CIOs by 2017?
No,
Why?
because we're partners.
Okay, good answer. Gerri?
I think it just depends how you measure it, frankly. If you take the whole spectrum of IT spend, I don't think there's any way that a CMO would spend more than the total IT investment in a company. But depending on how you've structured, sure, you could have a department where the IT department spends less than the CMO. So I think it's kind of a silly question, frankly.
Okay, well, I'm still going to ask the silly question to Sheila.
No, I think the same thing. I think it's impossible to think the CMO, one function, could spend more than what IT does to support the entire enterprise. But having said that, I think it's if the entire organization is spending more on technology, that's the thing we should celebrate.
Yeah, okay. The most important characteristic of a CIO is?
Being a connector.
Being a partner.
Communication.
Okay. The industry that needs most needs to be disrupted is?
The IRS.
Healthcare.
I don't know if that's an industry, but it's close enough.
Healthcare.
I would say state education.
Oh, those are all good. What about commercial industry? The commercial industry that most needs to be disrupted is?
Manufacturing.
Cable TV. Sorry.
Sheila?
I'm thinking. I think there's been a lot of work done in the airline industry, but I still think there's a lot more.
There's a lot more. Yeah.
How about virtual alcohol?
Okay. Do you have one?
No.
Okay. Then I'm going to start with you on the next one.
Okay.
What's the least understood thing about digital transformation?
Well, I think that it's all about the data. That for me, I think sometimes people get really excited about the next application on a piece of glass or the next visual, which is all very, very, very important. But the data is so core to all of that.
Yeah.
To me, it's about to deliver a frictionless, great digital experience. It's about reducing complexity end to end across the functions.
Yeah.
I would say there's two P's, permanence and pervasiveness.
Okay.
I just had to teach my son about permanent digital footprint, by the way. It was not a fun conversation.
This is yet another conversation that you have with your children now.
Yes.
Thank God Facebook did not exist when we were in college. All right, what keeps you up at night?
The bad guys. Security.
Helping my daughters with math.
Talent.
Good. And then your biggest priority in your role for 2016 is?
Continuing our simplification. And then I think we've also announced that with the separation that we're going to be actually doing some acquisitions. So that'll be a priority for next year.
Yeah, right now I'm just learning a new business. Retail is new for me, so that's what I'm going to be focused on.
Cool.
For me, it's really about getting ready for the digital platform to actually become more intense with the volumes that are coming.
And then last question from me, and as I ask my last question, you can think about the questions in this room. What's the one thought that you want to leave with technologists and CIOs in this room as we think about digital transformation that we haven't hit on yet?
I just want to reiterate that I think, as in many transformations, we can talk about the technology, we can talk about all the gee whiz stuff, but people are still at the core of it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's about a cultural change of how we work together, how we partner, how we think of the customer, and how we engage, which to me are all people things.
My favorite phrase, professionally and personally, go big or go home.
And I got to go back to it, it may have been said, but digital transformation doesn't mean anything if you don't think about the customer experience. It's all about the customer and partner employee experience at the end of the day. It's not about the cool technology or about the cool data or about all the analytics. It's about what are you doing different that's going to give you a different differentiation to your company from a customer and partner perspective.
Great, great. All right, so now we'd like to open it up to questions in the audience. And we've got mic runners on either side, and we have one over here.
Thank you. My question is, you talked about being business leaders. Yeah, I'm here. Business leaders. Business leaders are focused on revenue. How can you drive revenue?
That's a great question.
So I'll start. We did a thing called our data as a service on our Norton consumer business, and it's exactly that. We worked with our data scientists and our team to think about what consumers were coming into Norton. Who were they? What were they looking for? How do you start segmenting them? How do you think about them differently? Do you start offering them a different product, the right offer to the right person at the right time based upon what they've purchased before, who they are, all the segmentation. So I think the web and the internet have all sorts of ways to. The thing I would say in digital transformation that didn't come up is, I think in the past we think about a customer transaction. I mean, even we use the language that way. And I just think that's completely wrong to think, and again, I'm a shopper and I have my relationships with certain consumer companies, but it's really about the interaction in the continuous dialogue and continuous communication. That's where I think it's going to win, is if you're a customer that's loyal and you're going to keep coming back, then don't talk to me about and ask me for my name, address, and phone number again every single time I interact with you. Tell me, let's pick up the conversation that happened the last interaction. That's the value of digital transformation.
Yeah, I've heard some CIOs talking about trying to turn themselves into a profit center. And as a business leader, I don't think about profit centers as organizations. I think about the company and the business. So I would agree with Sheila. When I was at Adobe, one of the ways that the organization I had, which happened to be IT, really contributed to the revenue of the company was by driving a really exceptional level of personalization in product to build that ongoing engagement. So I think CIOs and IT departments help build revenue all the time. Now, whether that shows up on their cost center as an income, well, that's all about accounting and bookkeeping. So I think it's important for a CIO and IT leader to think about what revenue do I connect to and can I show line of sight to, and you and your partner business leader who owns that revenue line need to start talking that way. You are part of that revenue line. And it's all about, so I'm going to go back, it's all about relationships. It's not about the accounting.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, for high tech, we're looking at the products and we're giving a lot of feedback around those internal use cases that definitely apply, helping the field understand this is how you actually want to position it. These are the kinds of problems you're solving. You're not just selling a solution or a bundle or a software set, right? When coming into Informatica and looking at, when I asked, hey, is Informatica a customer? Do I have an account manager? Do I have a support manager? The answer was no. I said, why? Why are we not treating ourselves? Because I'm going to give you the first and loudest feedback about that experience. And if that experience is good or bad, that's either going to help you with your revenue line or it's going to hurt you with your close ratio. So I think there's aspects of that. I think it's also understanding the problems we need to solve internally and how to package those so that they're repeatable and sellable or can be monetized into different ways. So creating a virtual CIO dashboard. So I'm getting asked all the time to sit in on all these customer meetings, and I'm one person, I can only scale. So I basically said, you know what, I'm just going to give you a login to my dashboard. We're running all of our own products. I've got total control and visibility of what the data flow is. That's what you're selling to them, is visibility of that data architecture so that they can understand when there's a breach or a security concern or how it's being consumed. Why don't, if you take that into every meeting and start it and say, let me just show you what my CIO is watching. And I'm not afraid of showing reds on there. So I totally agree with celebrate red, right? It's okay to show the customer, these are the challenges that we face every day, because it actually helps them understand and you become relevant in the conversation. So there's a couple of different ways. Some are direct and some are indirect.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Sandy. My question may end up relating back to some of the responses to the previous question, but my question was, how does customer experience influence or factor into the digital transformation?
It's pretty direct. I think that's where you get the immersion. I talked a little bit earlier about ambience, right? The ambient experience, and there's no blurring of line anymore. So when I go on LinkedIn, I'm doing something and looking at something more professional or researching something, researching counterparts, catching up on news even. And then when I go into Facebook, the stuff I've looked at on LinkedIn is showing in Facebook. So it is all one, and it is that experience, and it's how that's traversing. So I don't know that I see it as completely separate in that experience. I think it's just the immersion, and you have to understand where you're getting immersed and what that transference looks like.
So I kind of think about it in three buckets, and I think I've mentioned all those three, and I know Sheila's mentioned them, and I'm sure you too, Ginna, during this conversation. Here's the three buckets I think about. I think about services as a service architecture layer. And if you don't have that, you're going to have a hard time making any great digital transformation user experience, because back to the scale point, you're not going to get the scale of whatever it is you're trying to run worldwide big. Go big or go home.
Yeah.
On top of that, you've got, or along with that, you've got data, and making sure that you've really got the streaming data, the real-time data, the Internet of Things data, and you've really stitched that together. And then for me, the third leg of that stool is what I would call user experience. And I really mean visual beauty, visual engagement. You know, that those artists that sit in the room who know nothing about technology and are designing beautiful apps. Every IT organization I know that has really done a very successful digital transformation effort has had a real artist build those first cuts of user experience design, not somebody who knew anything about programming. And I know I had that experience at Adobe in a very big way. We were a very design-led culture, but what a difference it is when you have an artist on your staff as a CIO. And you start letting them design every single user experience before anybody in your IT team starts getting at it. It changes everything. So I think that's an element that we haven't talked specifically about here, but the value of a design-led user experience is really key, and it's very subtle.
Great. Next question.
The
digital tools such as 3D printing, customer co-creation of products and services that you offer, pay-as-you-want type of schemes, the use of augmented and virtual reality, are you all experimenting with these in your digital transformation process?
Yeah, I would say as Symantec for sure. We're thinking, as Gerri mentioned about Adobe, is we are really thinking about security as a service. So when I think about our unified security strategy, there's 4 pillars. I won't go into those, but one of them is all about services, so offering security as a service. Let us help you with your monitoring and incident response. Let us help you with your cyber awareness within your organization. So I think the whole notion of services is new in the security world, and I think as we think about those services, it has to factor in those other elements of the overall experience as well. So yes.
So 3D printing is one of my favorite conversations and topics, and I actually came across it funding a Kickstarter, and it was funding an artist actually who had no way to take his very intricate designs and actually make a sculpture, and he became connected with Shapeways, and they actually used the 3D software to start to put that together. And his name's Josh Harker. You can look him up. His designs are incredible, and you start thinking about the aspects of 3D printing from a personal, what it's doing. Nike, you can order 3D printed shoes, totally customized. We talked about personalization, and it really is about that uniqueness, right? It's not just personalizing the experience so that Sheila, Gerri, and I have just a little bit of it. It's really that immersion of this is my design and one of a kind, and that is becoming more and more. I think manufacturing is starting to become disruptive, but the thing that surprised me the most in 3D printing is how fast it's becoming pervasive in healthcare. They're doing some amazing things, even out of San Francisco, where they're able to 3D print perfect strands of DNA and eliminate all cancers and whatnot. So there are some really go big moments in a vertical that I would have never thought that 3D printing was mainstream for them, and it's becoming more mainstream for them than manufacturing even, right? So. There's a ton of data behind that, right? So,
Gerri,
do you guys know about the Autodesk example of? So they did the bust of Obama, and they went to Autodesk. They had to, I don't know, they had this huge entourage of Secret Service, cybersecurity, NSA, because if that digital footprint got out, it would have been national security. Because somebody could have printed a mask that looked exactly like him, right? So it's under lock and key and back at the White House. But it was a big deal when he came here at Autodesk and did that 3D printed bust. So it's kind of interesting.
So I'm going to take your 3D thing and go to a really different corner, just to reinforce how much of those technologies are now consumerized. So I saw this little 3D printer right out here. Well, we have one just like that in our house. And my daughters, who are sitting right back there, who are 12, one of their favorite things to do is to sit around and draft 3D objects and print them. So when we had our Halloween party this year and we were Frankenstein, thank you for asking that, because we had to have bolts on our heads. So we had custom bolts made from our 3D printer that were glued on our necks as a family.
That's fantastic.
Now, why I'm mentioning that, because it has nothing to do with transforming an industry or but it's a great example. I'm really serious about you watch the technology that the next generation is starting to consume, and to my kids, this is as common as a typewriter was when we were growing up. They just have a 3D printer in the craft room, and they have the software, and they can play all day long on that. So we almost have to rethink what is innovation. You know, it's not innovation to them. It's just the normal stuff.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Mark Ferrone. So IT has been really successful with service management. So how do you see service management expanding beyond IT to create more consumer experiences for employees?
So, I mean, I can take that, I think, as we're thinking about. So one of the things we did select was ServiceNow, which is our solution to manage kind of the operations of service management inside the organization. And it's been so successful because, again, it's this notion of a dashboard. What's the operation look like? It's an app on my phone. I can see what's going on, how many P1s I have, what the duration of the P1s are, who's the service owner. And it's been so impactful to how we run the service of IT that our HR organization's looking at using it, our marketing functions using it. So I just think that, again, these ways to run the operational side of it is completely, there's more likeness to it than there is difference.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I agree. Service management as a concept is very transferable. But I would also challenge IT departments to remember that managing your vendor technical supply chain is very different in this new world. And if you are still managing your vendors as sort of like, yep, that's a commodity and I'm going to renegotiate that contract once a year, and not really thinking of them as a very integral part of your service management process in a really visceral way, you've probably missed it. So I would say service management is as much outside your walls now as it is inside. And that's what I've seen be powerful.
Yeah, the only thing I would layer on that is it really has been transformational in the way people in IT think, right? And so I think the question over here was about how we drive revenue and whatnot. And I think it's more natural for us to be able to connect those dots and connect those ideas and bring that opportunity to the table. But what service management has done for IT is get IT people at lower levels to think more end-to-end, to what Sheila's been talking about repeatedly. I think we're really big believers in that end-to-end. And it is a journey for them. And it is sometimes a very dark journey for them. So, but once they get it and they start understanding, they start coming up with amazing ideas, and they really understand how to run that service like a business, and where you want to drive optimization and where you want to drive innovation into that service.
And just to add to that, because I think it's a great question, so we created the notion of service owners. So there's a service owner for most of our large services inside the organization. And I'll take video for a second. So all of a sudden, the video service owner that's deploying video inside Symantec globally across the company, we used to have the cases that when there's a problem outside the service, they wouldn't be responsible. That was more pure the operational team. And I said, no. The use cases, call the help desk, we allocate them to the service owner. So guess what? If you, service owner, have a lot of help desk calls, there's something wrong with your service. So again, it's the whole mentality that you own that service end to end. You got to go negotiate with bandwidth from the network guy if you need that, but you own that service, and you got to go figure out within your budget and within your constraints to go deliver and improve upon that service. And again, it's so back to talent. It's caused the service owners to be almost like that GM of their service, and to see them grow and develop and own their service, it's actually been fun to watch.
Yeah, and we did a similar thing at Adobe. It was very powerful. We had 50 service owners in IT and changed the entire structure of IT as an organization. A very, very powerful move. Yeah, wow. Totally worth doing.
That's great advice. Next question.
Doug Free, Accenture. It's clear your roles are more prominent with revenue and customer satisfaction and innovation. Is it changing how you and your groups are measured?
For where I'm at today in Informatica, it hasn't yet. And I think that's because of the maturity of the transformation that the company is going through. I think in the past, their CIOs have been very effective in that customer relationship, being the connector, probably closing some of those deals, but it hasn't really translated back to a quota, a number. Now, our dear friend Kim Stevenson, just recently at Intel, she's the CIO of Intel, she just recently made the commitment and assertion to sign up for a quota. And that's the first time I've heard a CIO, actually do that and put that on. And I think that might be the turning point where we see more of that. But for me personally, where I'm at today, the size of the company and the transformation we're going through, it hasn't yet. I do see that as we mature, it probably will come. Whether it's me signing up for a quota or not, I'm not sure, but.
So I'd say for sure in the ways that we're expressing our budget. So again, I go back to, I have my categories of as I go through the budgeting processes. Here I'm going to invest. So everything you do from an IT investment, you got to have an outcome. So I'm going to invest to save. the cost piece. I'm going to invest to grow the revenue piece, and I'm going to invest to secure, because that's just top of mind for everyone. So those three things, and I'll carve up our budget to say these investments are going to go do this, and here's the outcome I'm going to participate with. Now, in the grow piece, that's where I have to partner with marketing, or I'm going to partner with the product team or whatever. But yeah, there's natural, I would say, interesting partnerships on that, or understanding, but has it gotten down to a KPI yet? No, not yet on the revenue side.
And I think this comes back to culture, right? So there's a lot of cultural disruption that I think each company is going through their journey.
Yeah.
And
I think it's a great job for Accenture to take on those. How do you think about revenue KPIs for IT?
Next question.
Hi, my question is regarding open source, and how important do you think its role is going to be in the future IT, as well as its role in driving innovation? I mean, we've seen Amazon, we've seen Google spawn technologies like container, not just Google Kubernetes, but Docker containers, and almost shortening the life cycle of technologies like virtualization. We got Walmart using OpenStack-based technologies to have its own DevOps platform, like you guys were saying earlier, that it's really becoming a technology company. So I just wanted to hear from you that we see a lot of proprietary companies like IBM, HP pouring money into OpenStack and those kind of technologies. What do you think would be the role? How significant would it be of open source?
You have a good use case.
You go first, I'll go next.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the role of open source right now is alive and well, and I think it's growing. I don't know an IT peer of mine that isn't talking about open source in many layers of their stack for very different purposes. So I don't think it's a question of are people going to use open source. I think there's still some open questions in certain areas of software about confidence, and people's confidence for the supportability of some of the OpenStack capabilities. And I think, a lot of people have built businesses around becoming open source support companies, right? Now you don't pay for the code, you pay for the support through a model. So, there's got to be some monetization in there somewhere for companies. But I certainly don't hear debates about whether open source should be considered or not considered. These days, it's usually part of almost every evaluation I've seen for quite some time. But I think companies will still be cautious in certain categories.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's all about the use case. I think what's the use case? And again, we're in perhaps different areas. I think where it gets really interesting, because I talk to a lot of customers across the globe, highly regulated industries is going to take a little time, especially privacy, compliance, regulation. So I think we've got to think about the laws around privacy, and they're getting more and more stringent, especially with security coming and all the security controls. So I think there's a lot to think about, but I think for the right use case, for some of our product development work that we're doing, it's absolutely a viable alternative.
There's always going to be a debate, right? And I think this comes down to where you need to put it in at the product layer, how it scales. Supportability is a big turning point. I was just up in San Francisco, and there's a lot of VC firms that are spending a lot of money on the open source. If you look at the journey of Cloudera and you see what they've done, all of those open source ideas really do want to monetize, and they do want to sell to enterprise. And there is a difference to selling to enterprise versus a startup, or more deeply embedded at the product layer, because they know the enterprise, the supportability is where a lot of the revenue comes in, and that's generally the conversation that we look at. But and I think it's always going to end up in a religious debate, because engineers need to build it, but they don't necessarily need to support it in a go live production. Now, DevOps is putting a lot of pressure on that, because they're getting more and more responsible. And I like Sheila's idea of all the call tickets are going back to the service owner once you can make that final journey and actually have the service owner and service platform set up, because that does put skin in the game. And I think engineering, we're having this debate as we're moving at Informatica, as we're moving all of our products from on-prem license into a SaaS This is a highly, highly debated religious conversation inside between engineering and ourselves. And they're finally starting to understand, oh, yeah, okay, so if we're going to have to do code releases all the time, rapid cycle, DevOps, we probably want something a little more reliable, right?
Next question.
Karolina Hachulska. I have a question. How would you heal patient digital experience? And I know nobody, like none of you, is actually leading a healthcare company, but we're all patients from time to time. So what is it that you go as a patient to your healthcare provider that you find really, really annoying, and you're thinking, if I were leading this organization, I would change it on a spot?
Like, what wouldn't you change? I mean, the administration, the Medicare forms, the insurance, the providers, the healthcare, the waiting for the doctors. Whenever you're in the hospital, if you're ever in the hospital, they come in and the doctors actually ask you 20 times over, what medicine do you want? What do you do? You're the patient. They ask you. They don't even look at the. I mean, I just think the entire process is very broken, from the payee to all the people that are in the mix to the actual how the hospitals work. I mean, I just think it needs a lot of work. There isn't anything I don't think I would change. It doesn't feel personalized. It doesn't feel really relevant. It doesn't feel scale, like you can scale it.
Tell us
do you think I
how
have
you
an opinion about this?
How do you really feel?
I'm really not that sick either. So anyway. Yeah, it costs too much, yeah.
All right, we have time for just a few.
I don't know.
Did you have any?
No, I think you said
Sheila,
it all.
Sheila nailed it. She nailed it. We have time for just a few more questions. Next.
Yeah, my name is Ashok. What do you think about shadow IT? Is it alive and thriving? Is there a good side to it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in an IT, working as a CIO for a technology company, maybe that's changed, I won't say it that way, but I think there's always going to be shadow IT. And I learned at Cisco a long time ago that if there's shadow IT and something's going on, that means I'm not delivering a service that I should be delivering. So, and usually it pops up within the engineering organization. So having said that, I think it's a responsibility for IT professionals to pay attention. What are they using? What have we not delivered? What services? Now, where it gets a little, I'll tell you a funny story is, we decided when IT makes a decision on an enterprise solution, that's where I do think people need to comply, because we don't have the money and the cost to go do various solutions or multiple instances and the duplicate technologies. So I had this debate with an engineer once when we made the decision to use Jabber for our collaboration technology, and then he decided that no, he was going to go use this one other technology. And I said, well, fine, but you have to understand you're going to be collaborating with yourself, because you're going to be the only one on it. So, I mean, I use that as an example because it's kind of funny. Like, it really does show that clearly there's some things out there that we should pay attention to. What technology haven't we offered? What's important? What should we pay attention to? But if we've made an enterprise decision on a technology and that is it, and while people have preferences, you can't not comply. I mean, that's just a smart business decision.
Yeah, I would add a couple of comments. The word shadow IT, is it just me, but it makes you kind of prickle. Mm-hmm. Like, it already implies that it's bad, mm-hmm. and that they are trying to take your job. And I actually don't think either of those things are necessarily true. One of the things at Adobe that was really fun when we kind of stood back and said, wow, there's a lot of things that we would think of as technology jobs going on in our partner organizations. How do we want to think about that? And there were some cases where we had to kind of just pull people back around the wagons. But there was a lot of areas where we could actually entrust the business with guardrails to continue doing it themselves. So we got really focused on establishing 5 guardrails that we called the entrust guardrails. We had a governance process where people could continue to do those things that maybe you're calling shadow IT, but we put guardrails in place around things like security, mm-hmm. like operational capabilities, like data management and data classification, things that we knew were what was important about that activity, but not controlled the activity itself. And 2 really interesting things happened when we made that shift with the business. First of all, is they stopped feeling defensive about the conversation, and so did we. It started to become a partnership conversation again, because we use the word entrust. Like, we want to entrust you to do this, but to do that, here's kind of the rules of the game. And the second thing that happened that was really interesting was that in some cases, once we got into that a while, people realized that they didn't really want to be doing that. And some of those things kind of came full circle. And what the good news was, because of the guardrails, we didn't kind of get them back in that state of despair where you kind of have to start all over again, but we got them back in a reasonable place. So I would suggest, again, it's about culture and change, and start with the words, and that can help bring everyone along.
All right, last question.
Sorry, BJ. Doug Meyer, CISO at Pandora Media. I want to get back to the topic about DevOps and repositioning IT, and extending it to be a contributor in terms of innovation and enabling the business through development. So my question is that how are you thinking about balancing the risks inherent with DevOps, which is really rapid development from at least, like me, the late 90s, back when you could tack on security later. Here we are in 2015, almost 2016, and DevOps is really, ramping up. It's getting a lot of momentum. It has momentum. So what are your thoughts, what are your tactics for balancing that risk with also that desirable aspect of DevOps that really enables the business, and how are you going about and thinking about that?
Go ahead.
Okay, well, DevOps isn't Wild West project management. And so one of the things that I think is super important when you're establishing a DevOps model at scale is to consider security as an example. There has to be an architecture that DevOps will operate within that allows the DevOps organization to iterate very quickly in fast sprints, but they have to operate within some kind of architecture around security, and there have to be periodic governance checkpoints for that. So I think where I've seen people challenged in various companies that I've talked to is where they've gotten DevOps in kind of a mindset that means you do your own thing, that you're completely independent on your own cycle. And in fact, to have DevOps go really fast, you actually have to have some areas where you're going to have architectural standards that people know that's where the boundary is. And I would say security is one of those areas where if people don't start off with clarity on that, and I'll use data classification as a silly example, but if you don't have data classification clear to people, someone in a DevOps cycle can very easily break your entire security boundary inadvertently. So I would say that to make DevOps work really well, you actually have to be even more clear about where your architectural boundaries are around things like security, and then find a way to check in on that throughout the life cycles.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in the conversations as we're making the product transformation and the debates that are going on, we have, I'm very fortunate that my CISO has an amazing relationship back with engineering, and he has a very pragmatic approach. And what we've said is, and he's been really the brainchild of this mantra, and it is, you design the security in the product so you don't have to think about it after the fact. And you're not kind of chasing that audit loop or that compliance loop. It's automatically compliant because the product was built that way. And that's one element. I think the other thing is really, Gerri touched on it, around standards, and you have to be somewhat religious around your standards, where that product is in its maturity life cycle, how many customers are on it, what kind of revenue, is it something you're bundling? Or is it something you're OEMing? And I think you have to be very clear around what you're doing with that product. Scale in a different way, definition maybe.
All right.
All right. I'd like to thank our speakers, and Lynn, all of you are our speakers, for sharing your views with us so candidly. Thank you very much. As a very small gesture of thanks, we have for you the Churchill Club Speaker T-shirt. Please wear that in very good health. Hopefully that will keep you warm up in Seattle.
Thank you.
Gerri. A recording of this program will be available on the Churchill Club YouTube channel within a day or so, where you will find recordings of most of our other programs as well. So we hope that you do find that to be a useful resource. Check your printed programs tonight for the next couple of programs coming up. The next one is on January 21st. We hope to see you there. Meantime, happy holidays. See you soon. Good night.